Today, I'm going to show you an alternative mosquito broker that you can use as an add-on in Home Assistant. It's called EMQX, and it has a nice graphical interface that shows you what's going on with your IoT devices. So let's get started. Before we actually dig into how to install EMQX, let's talk a little bit about what EMQX is. They claim it's the most scalable MQTT broker for all of these different things. Connect any device at any scale, move and process your IoT data in real time from anywhere. So MQTT is a messaging system that allows things like your ESP boards, your temperature sensors, lots of smart home devices, lots of IoT devices to send data back in packets to some central location, a broker in this case, to be processed by whatever device or thing is going to process it. So in Home Assistant, we have a plugin or an add-on for this now, thanks to Frank. EMQX is an add-on you can install natively in Home Assistant, and you're going to get data like this on a dashboard, and I'll show you that here in a little bit when I get it installed. This is basically from that website. It's an open, a high-performance real-time message processing engine. It powers event streaming for IoT devices at massive scale. It's the most scalable MQTT broker and can help you connect any device at any scale, including your home. And of course, this is marketing stuff that they talk about on their website. I have not personally verified it, nor do I have anywhere near the amount of capacity that any MQTT broker I've installed can max out at. So I couldn't even test it, but we'll just take their word for it. It's an advanced alternative to the Mosquito broker that is already generally used in Home Assistant. There is a UI that allows you to configure, manage, and debug your MQTT broker, your clients, and your traffic. And then there's all this documentation on their website that talks about all of how to set it up and how to configure it. Now, at the time of this video, this is an experimental stage or an experimental add-on, so it will continue to evolve. It works out of the box as an MQTT broker. Some of the documentation may need some updating and stuff like that. So we will go through some of this here in a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and install the MQTT broker on my Home Assistant instance. A couple things to note. Let me go to the add-ons page here. I am already running or was running the standard Mosquito broker that's built into Home Assistant. So in order to run EMQX, you need to make sure this is turned off because it shares the same ports and has the same communications channels. If you want to have multiple MQTT brokers, this particular EMQX can act in a cluster setup. I'm not going to cover that today, but basically it means you can run multiple EMQX, MQTT brokers in a cluster formation. And then you have basically high availability or failover or things like that. That might be something fun to play with later on if you're running more than one Home Assistant instance to set up a cluster of EMQX nodes. And maybe I'll do that later on. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and add the EMQX add-on. And let me just show you what I did here because I was in the way. This is the add-on store button. You always click that to add new add-ons. Search up here for EMQX. And remember, it's part of the Home Assistant Community Add-ons repository or add-on store. You'll need to make sure that you're running or install the Home Assistant Community Add-on store by going through the repositories set up here. I'm not going to cover that today. I've covered that in other videos. But if you don't have it, search the repositories for Home Assistant Community Add-ons and then make sure you have that available to you. So once you do that, you just click on EMQX and you click on Install. And it's going to go through the install process and do its thing here. Okay, so now that it has installed, you can do your standard selections for add-ons. Start it on boot. This one allows you to show it in the sidebar. This is ingress capable, which means that you can connect to it or reach it without having to go directly to a specific port. You can just go to your Home Assistant URL and get to this add-on directly. Okay, so you need to make sure that you have not, or you are not running another MQTT broker before you try to start it. There is documentation here. This documentation is a little bit outdated from what's on the website. And like I said, this is being updated as we go along. So by the time you watch this video, it may already be updated. A couple of points here is I had to go find out what this default username and password was when I first started it. It was a little bit of research. you need to make sure that you have set up authentication for your MQTT client. This has to be done or it's not going to work. Okay. Those things aren't necessarily noted over here yet, but they probably will be once this update or this add-on gets an update. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start it. I'm going to check the logs and make sure everything works well. One of the other issues I ran into on my production setup is I had a port conflict. And it looks like let's just make sure everything looks like it's running. So I had a port conflict on my other production setup when I was doing this. And the way I had to deal with that was it was actually my web RTC stuff was on port 8083. And EMQX also uses port 8083 for its WS port, its WebSocket port. So that caused a conflict. I actually had to go into the WebRTC code and change the port, or I had either that or I had to uninstall it. I chose to change the port in the configuration. If you get a port conflict, you're going to have to figure out what thing is actually conflicting with it, and there's a number of ways to do that. If you have a problem with that, we can maybe help you on Discord or in the comments, someone has a solution for that. The other option is to stop whatever's conflicting with that port, open up or start up EMQX here, and then go back in, change the port in EMQX for the WebSocket, and then restart the other thing. So there's ways around that. All right, so this is up and running now. If we go back over here, I thought it was, let's just double check here. All right, it is running. So you can see listener is listening on 883, 1883, 8083, 8084, and 18083. So now we'll go over here. And a lot of times it won't update this screen. I'll just click or refresh this, and now I have the Web UI button. So let's open the Web UI. And again, if you look at the documentation here, the login with the default credentials, admin and public, and it will force a change, I believe. So admin, and then we'll use public for the password, log in for the first time. It says that you are logging in with the default password, and it will prompt you to change that. So we'll change it to something else, confirm it, and now it'll ask you to log in again, admin, and then the new password you used. Okay, now we're up and running with this. If you have anything that's connected to it, which you probably don't because you haven't done any user authentication setup yet, you can look at the dashboard and we'll see we have 0 connections, 0 topics, 0 subscriptions. So the first thing we want to do is go over here to authentication. We want to create a mechanism for authentication. It's going to be password based, most likely. There are other ways, JWT and Scram. If you understand what that means, you're ahead of a lot of people. We're going to go password based. Click on next. We're going to use the built-in database. You could use MySQL, Mongo, Postgres, or Redis if you want to store your credentials there. And then the server's HTTPS server. So I'm going to click on next for that. I'm going to use the user ID type of username. And then this stuff you can all leave the same. A SHA-256 hash. Salt position is on the suffix. And then create. Now we have a mechanism for doing authentication. We need to add a user. So I'm going to click on built-in database, and you have an overview of execution statistics, how many successful, failed, no match, and then the rate, and then who is connected currently on a node basis. I need to go to user management, and I need to add a user so that things can talk to my broker. A lot of my devices have a username password that's required to connect to my broker, or my broker requires a username and password for something to connect to it. So I'm going to create a demo user and a demo password, and you can mark it as super user if you want to. I will not at this time. I will click on save. And all that means now is that anything that I want to connect to this broker, including the integration, which I'm about to show you, will need to use a username and password. So now what I want to do is go over to my Home Assistant integrations, and I will go to that now. And I probably already have an integration for MQTT, and I do over here. 1 device and 2 entities are already running on that, but I'm going to reconfigure it. If you don't have that, you need to come over to this add integration and search for MQTT. What this is the reason you do that is that you're creating an add-on or adding an add-on. That is a standalone thing that runs on your Home Assistant instance. In order for the Home Assistant operating system to understand or talk to that thing you just installed, that's why you have the integration. So this integration is the go-between from the add-on to Home Assistant, and it's required in order for it to talk back and forth. So we're going to configure this. And under MQTT settings, if you already have it set up, you're going to have to reconfigure. And I will click on that. My broker name is going to be the IP address of this particular device. You could actually, this one needs to be localhost because I had an issue with that. I'll set this to localhost. I will set the username to that username I just used. And the password will be set to the password I just set up. And I will click on next. If you see this screen, that means it's successfully connected or can connect to your broker. So it's now talking to the EMQX broker. It's asking you if you want to enable discovery, if you want to enable the birth message. That's a funny term. It tells you what this is. Discovery will automatically discover devices and entities which publish their configuration on the MQTT broker. So Home Assistant will see a new device if you add that new device. If you turn that off, then you'll have to do everything manually. Birth message is sent each time Home Assistant reconnects to the broker, so you'll get some sort of message there if you want to track that. There is a will message down here, retain. The will message will be sent each time Home Assistant loses its connection to the broker, both in case of a clean shutdown or an unclean shutdown. So I'm going to leave enable discovery, enable birth message all the same. The birth message topic will be Home Assistant /status. And then the payload will be online. That's the thing it'll send to the broker. Quality of service will be 0. And then the will message, I'll leave that as alone as well. And then the same thing for quality of service. And I'm going to submit that. And now it's successfully saved. And now we have a connection to our broker. So now we can go back over to our dashboard and just kind of see if anything is going on here. And of course, I don't expect anything because all of my devices are pointing over to the other production instance. So now that you have the authentication set up, you have the integration, that's all you need to do. Now you can start sending things over to your Home Assistant MQTT broker or your EMQX broker here to allow it to start picking up that IoT traffic and do stuff with it in Home Assistant. Now let's go over to my production version and we'll take a look at what actually is going on here. So here we are in the production instance that is actually doing all the work in my environment. And you can see right off the bat here on this dashboard, we have a list of incoming rate and an outgoing rate of messages that are happening. I have 10 connections, 170 topics, and 206 subscriptions. It gives you node data such as the node name, the uptime, and all of this information. You can dig into the nodes. If you are running a clustered setup, you'll see all these different nodes here as well. I only run the one node right now. And then you've got metrics that give you an idea of what's going on. This type of setup is useful for debugging your IoT stuff, your MQTT traffic on a user interface type basis. But you get all of the topics or all of the metrics you need to understand how well your stuff is working. And if you're doing development or things like that, this is actually super helpful for that as well. You can look at the number of connections that are being made right now into your MQTT broker. All of these clients are now connected to my broker, what their status is, what username they're using, the IP address they're coming from, their keep alive, and their connection or when they connected. And you can also kick them out. So if you have some rogue device on here, you can actually kick that out and prevent it from doing stuff. You can search by client ID, username, and node. There's also subscriptions that give you an overview of all of the subscriptions coming into your broker and I guess going out of your broker as well. And I have, like I said, 200 and something subscriptions. And then topics, I have all of these topics that I'm currently using in my setup. Now, if you're adding a new MQTT device and you want to know if it's working, you can come over here to topics and see if it's coming in here to the topics as well. Under diagnose, I'm going to skip a little bit here. You can actually go in and take one of these topics and you can look at the metrics for that specific topic. For example, if I look at my freezer plug state or my freezer plug sensor, I can tell you how many incoming messages, outgoing messages, and how many drop messages are going on in this particular topic. So if you think you're missing something is not working correctly, or you think you're missing IoT or MQTT packets, you can come over here and take a look at these metrics. And of course, you can click on these to kind of drop them down and get an idea graphically what they are. It tells you how many messages per second are coming in from that particular topic. This helps you also to identify something that might be spamming your MQTT network. If you feel like there's a slowdown somewhere within your network or in your IoT or in your MQTT setup, you can certainly come over here and do some debugging to see what's going on. You can also look at slow subscriptions. This has to be enabled initially, but it'll tell you anything that has a slow subscription coming into your network or into your broker. And here are the settings for that: 500 millisecond threshold, eviction time is 300 seconds. All of these things you can set as well for that. All right, so under access control, we talked about that. You can blacklist also items here. You can create a blacklist for clients to keep them from coming in. You can blacklist them for a certain period of time. And then you can note a reason in the notes if you want to. You've got data integration. Some of this gets outside the scope of what you typically would do with Home Assistant, but it is available because this is a very full-featured MQTT broker. And you're doing all this locally, which is a huge thing. You're not running this out in the cloud somewhere, although there is an option for you to use their cloud. But you're not doing this in the cloud. All of this sits locally within your network. And so you have all this power and all of this ability and capability here. Rules, you can set up rules here. You can set up flows as well. Again, this is beyond the scope of today's video, but is definitely something you can do as well. Configuration, you can set up your listeners. If you don't want to listen on SSL, if you don't want to listen on TCP, or if you don't want to listen on WS, then you can turn these off. These are the things that you can change if you have an issue with a port conflict. Let's say that 8083 port conflict. If I wanted to change the port it listened to, I could disable it and then change that port and restart up that other device. So it does give you the option to either disable it entirely if you don't need it, or you can change the ports. You can reconfigure the settings on these ports for anything that you want to do. And you can see at a glance which things have connections. So all of my stuff is coming in on TCP port 1883. MQTT has some settings. You have idle timeouts, a whole bunch of settings I won't go through. You have session settings, retainer settings. These are all of the retained messages right now. If you have something that you need to not retain or get rid of, you can delete the retained message. You can also show the payload of a retained message to see what's in there. And if it would work, then you would be able to see that. But right now, that doesn't seem to work properly. So we will skip over that because that's not doing what it's supposed to. Again, this is an experimental add-on, so there may be some things that still need to be worked on to get those working. You can set up log levels, log handling. You can set up the file handler for where this is, where you want to store the logs. And then you can do monitoring of this integration using Prometheus or StatsD if you want to do that. And then, of course, there's a whole bunch of extensions. There's gateway extensions. All of these are available to you. And then some plugins and other things. Why do we do EMQX versus something else? Well, it allows, I'm going to quote somebody else's words here. It's helpful to debug, and it's a good UI to control and manage authentication and authorization. That's something you have to do in Home Assistant with the native MQTT broker. You have to go into Home Assistant and create users that are available to the MQTT broker there. With this, it's all contained within just the MQTT broker itself. You can use single MQTT server for multiple instances of Home Assistant, Zigbee to MQTT for dev, test, production, without conflicting with each other. And then, of course, you can set up clusters to allow you to have some sort of failover and high availability for the MQTT broker if you want to do that. I was talking earlier, as I'm filming this video, about how the documentation is going to be updated. When we did the add-on, of course, you didn't see all this extra documentation. There has been a new update pushed out. And you can see here that there's a new version, mainly with documentation updates processed from various places, including the comments and questions that myself and others have asked about that. And so what that means is things like the username and password and the authentication and connecting to Home Assistant initially is going to be something that you can see in the documentation on the new update. So that's good. I appreciate Frank going out there and making the changes, pushing out an update quickly based on feedback just yesterday that I was asking about. So that's really awesome. Okay, so this was just a quick overview of EMQX. It gives you an option for MQTT broker. Just remember the key points. Make sure that you're not running another broker when you do this. If you want to use this broker, you'll need to set up authentication on the broker for any other devices that you are that are connecting to it. And let me tell you, one thing I've realized is that I have too many usernames and passwords. Every time I would add a device, I would forget what I was doing before with a username and password. Using EMQX is now forcing me into using the right username and password and not guessing which ones I've used in the past. So that's great for the authentication part of it. So let me know if you have any questions down below. Let me know if you have any comments on Discord. If you need any help with any of this, let me know that as well. Hit the wiki page, the add-on page. It has all the documentation there as well. And if you really want to get into EMQX and you want to spend a lot of time understanding it and getting into how it works, there are documents that get you all kinds of configuration options here. And remember, we're on version 5.0, so you'll have to search the 5.0 documentation, but you can go through here and get tons and tons of setups. You can override the environment variables as well if you need to for specific things. It is just a full-featured broker. Okay, I've said enough. I think it's time to let y'all get into playing with this and let me know how you think it goes and whether this is something that is useful to you, and we will see you on the next video.